It started with small things at first. Little changes in Ally's behavior that I brushed off as stress, because, life happens. We'd been married for 5 years, had 2 kids, and I thought I knew her better than anyone. She was always the center of our little world. But then, something started to shift. Her phone was always face down when she was home, even when she used it, which was strange for her. She stopped initiating conversations or little moments that used to be a regular part of our routine. And when I'd ask how her day went, she'd give short answers, always busy or tired. At first, I thought it was just stress. Work was demanding, the kids were more exhausting than usual, and I could barely keep up with my own responsibilities. So, I figured she was just burned out. We've all been there. But I couldn't ignore that sinking feeling in my gut. It was like a whisper in the back of my mind that kept telling me something was off. I remember one night, sitting at the kitchen table, watching her stare blankly at her phone, her fingers tapping away with a frown I couldn't quite place. "Everything okay?" I asked, casually. She just nodded, not looking up. "Yeah, just tired." She said it like a mantra. I didn't press her for more, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. The nights started to stretch longer. I'd stay up late, staring at the ceiling, waiting for her to come to bed, but she'd often find excuses to stay up, watching Netflix or finishing work. That's when I noticed the late-night texts. She'd try to hide them, but she wasn't quick enough. The phone would buzz on the kitchen counter, and I'd catch a glimpse of a name I didn't recognize. Still, I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. It was probably nothing. Stress, right? Life was busy, and we hadn't had time for just us lately. I kept telling myself that a couple of weeks after I started noticing the small changes, Ally's behavior started getting harder to ignore. She was more distant, and I couldn't even remember the last time we had a real conversation. She used to be the one who wanted to sit down at the end of the day, talk about everything, work, life, whatever, but now, she was always in a rush. Every time I tried to ask her about her day, it was like pulling teeth. "Nothing interesting," she'd say, or "busy, just work stuff." It felt like I was talking to a stranger. Then came the night I'll never forget. I came home early from work, and I was ready to surprise her. I was planning on taking her out for a nice dinner, something to break the monotony, to reignite the spark. I walked in, expecting to find her in the kitchen, maybe setting up for dinner, but she wasn't there. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. I went to the living room and found her sitting on the couch, her phone in her hand, her face lit up by the screen. It was like she didn't even notice me at first. I stood there for a moment, unsure if I should interrupt or let her finish whatever she was doing. But when I looked closer, I saw the smile on her face, this soft, content smile that didn't feel like the smile I was used to. It felt off. I tried to push it down, tell myself I was overthinking it. "Hey," I said, trying to be casual. "I was thinking we could go out tonight, maybe grab a bite?" She looked up, startled, almost like she had been lost in a world of her own. "Oh, I'm really not in the mood tonight," she replied, her voice almost robotic. "Just not feeling it. Maybe another time." I forced a smile, but inside, my stomach churned. This wasn't her. She always liked the idea of a spontaneous night out, especially when things were feeling tense. I didn't know it then, but something had shifted in her. I asked if everything was okay, and she gave me a quick, dismissive answer, like I was the one making a big deal out of nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. That smile, the way she was glued to her phone, the quick dismissals, it was all adding up, and the worst part was, I didn't know if I was ready to face it. It was easier to keep pretending that everything was fine, but deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore it much longer. It was about a week later when I got the confirmation, though I didn't want to admit it to myself at first. I had just gotten home from work, tired and ready to settle in for the night. Ally was in the kitchen, making dinner, humming a tune I didn't recognize. It was like everything was normal, almost too normal. But something about her felt off. She wasn't looking at me like she usually did, like she was glad to see me. Instead, she just went about her routine, stirring the pot and not really engaging. I didn't want to make a scene, didn't want to accuse her of anything when I didn't have any solid proof. But the gut feeling kept nagging at me. It was that feeling, you know? The one that tells you something's wrong even before you've pieced everything together. Then, I heard it. Her phone buzzed from the living room. Normally, she would have jumped up to grab it, but this time she didn't. It buzzed again, and I saw her flinch, like the sound was coming from a distance, but it was hitting her in a way that didn't feel right. I decided to check on it. My mind raced, but I tried to keep calm, justifying it as maybe it's nothing, but there was a weight to it. I grabbed the phone and saw a string of messages from a name that wasn't familiar to me, Mark. They weren't long messages, just short, playful exchanges. But what caught my eye was the last one. It was a selfie of Ally, taken in the kitchen, that she had clearly just sent. She looked happy, too happy. And her response was, "I'll make sure to sneak away next time we're alone." My heart dropped into my stomach. My first thought was to confront her right there, to ask what was going on, but I couldn't find my voice. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, not without knowing the whole truth. So I put the phone back, feeling like the floor had just shifted beneath me. I was standing there, caught between the urge to run and the instinct to stay. That night, Ally came to bed late. I lay there, pretending to sleep, my mind racing. The images of that text message kept replaying in my head. I couldn't sleep, but I didn't say a word. I wasn't sure how to approach it yet. Could I confront her and risk losing everything right there? Or should I wait until I had more answers? But deep down, I knew it wasn't just a misunderstanding. Something had changed, and I could feel it in the air between us. I had never felt more alone in the same room with her. That night, I stayed up, staring at the ceiling, hearing Ally's steady breathing beside me. I wanted to reach out and shake her, demand the truth, but I stayed still, letting the silence speak for me. The next morning, everything felt different. The weight of that text message still hung in the air, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. Ally was already up before me, making coffee, humming that same tune. She looked perfectly fine, like nothing had changed. But I couldn't shake the feeling in my gut. It was like I was walking through a fog, just waiting for the inevitable collision. I didn't know how to begin the conversation. I wanted to ask, "What's going on?" I wanted to confront her about the messages, about the lies that were building between us, but I had to find the right words. I couldn't just blurt out what I was thinking and ruin everything. Or could I? I finally decided I couldn't wait anymore. I needed to know the truth, even if it shattered me. I walked into the kitchen, where she was flipping pancakes, and just stood there, watching her for a moment. She glanced up, giving me that smile that no longer felt reassuring. "Morning," she said, like everything was normal. "Ally," I said, my voice shaky but firm. "We need to talk." She froze, her smile faltering for just a second. She knew. I could tell. "About what?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but I saw her hands tremble slightly as she set down the spatula. "The texts," I said, watching her face go pale. "Who's Mark?" Her eyes widened, and for a second, I saw a flicker of panic in her expression. She quickly looked away, like she was searching for an escape, but there was no place to hide. It's nothing," she said quickly, the words spilling out of her mouth in a way that made my stomach churn. "It's just a friend from work. It's not what you think." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Nothing? Was she really trying to brush this off like it was nothing? "Don't lie to me," I said, the words coming out sharper than I meant them to. "I saw the messages, Ally. I know it's more than just nothing." Her face turned red, and she looked like she was going to cry, but she still refused to meet my eyes. It's complicated," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I swear, I never wanted to hurt you." Something in me snapped. I wasn't angry yet, but I felt a cold, hollow pain spread through my chest. Complicated? No. It wasn't complicated. It was a betrayal, pure and simple. I had trusted her with everything. We built a life together, and she was throwing it all away over a stupid text conversation with someone I didn't even know. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the flood of emotions threatening to spill out. "I need the truth, Ally," I said quietly. "I need you to be honest with me. What's really going on between you and him?" She looked at me then, her eyes filled with guilt and shame. She didn't say anything at first, but I could see the conflict written on her face. For a moment, I thought she might tell me the whole story. But instead, she just shook her head, her voice small. "It was a mistake, Tim. A big mistake. But I swear, it didn't mean anything." I felt sick. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. A mistake. That's how she saw it? Something that had no meaning? After everything we'd been through? After everything we built? Do you love him? I asked, the question hanging between us like a heavy weight. She flinched at the question, and for a second, I thought I saw her eyes water. But she quickly wiped her face and shook her head. No, Tim. I don't love him. It was just a moment of weakness. I never meant for it to go this far. A moment of weakness. I almost laughed at the irony. Was that supposed to make it okay? Was she really asking me to believe that? To just forget everything and pretend nothing had changed? I stood there, trying to absorb the words, but it felt like my brain couldn't process them. My heart was telling me to walk away, to end this right now before I got any more tangled in this mess, but I couldn't. I needed to hear more. I needed to understand what happened, why it happened. Then why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice softer now. Why did you keep it a secret? She looked away again, her hands shaking as she clutched the edge of the counter. I don't know. I thought I could fix it on my own. I didn't want to hurt you, Tim. I never wanted to hurt you. But she had. She had already hurt me, more than she could possibly understand. I stared at her, trying to decide what to do next. I wanted to yell, to break everything, to make her feel the pain I was feeling, but something told me to hold it together. For the sake of our kids. For the sake of what was left of our marriage. But I couldn't help but wonder if it was already too late. The trust had been shattered, and no amount of apologies could fix that. I didn't say anything else. I just walked out of the kitchen, leaving Ally standing there, her eyes following me, but I couldn't look back. I didn't know what to say anymore. I didn't know if I even wanted to try to fix this. The next few days were a blur. The house felt like a foreign place, filled with echoes of what used to be. Ally and I barely spoke after that confrontation. I could feel the walls between us growing thicker, and every word that came out of her mouth sounded like an apology wrapped in excuses, but it didn't reach me. I couldn't let it. She tried to make things right, sort of. She brought me coffee in the mornings, asked how my day was going, but it all felt hollow. I couldn't forget what she had done, and the more she tried to make amends, the more it felt like she was trying to erase the truth. I couldn't escape the images of her with him, Mark. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smile at her phone, sending those little messages, those secret exchanges that I never saw coming. And I couldn't help but feel like a fool. All these years, thinking everything was fine, that we were on the same page. But now, I was left picking up the pieces of a relationship that felt like it was slipping through my fingers. One night, she tried to sit me down again, saying she wanted to talk more. We need to fix this, she said, her voice trembling like she was on the verge of tears. But the more she talked, the less I could believe her. She kept saying how sorry she was, how much she regretted what happened, but it was too little, too late. The trust was gone. The foundation we had built was cracked, and I couldn't pretend anymore. I remember asking her, "What do you want from me, Ally? Do you want me to just forget everything and move on? Do you think we can just go back to normal?" She didn't have an answer. She just sat there, looking at me with those wide, sad eyes, but there was no real understanding in her gaze. She didn't seem to get it. She didn't understand that what she had done wasn't just a mistake, it was a betrayal. And I couldn't erase that. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I kept tossing and turning, my mind racing. The kids were asleep in their rooms, and I was alone in the dark, trying to figure out what to do next. Could I really go on pretending everything was okay? Could I stay in a marriage built on lies? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing: I couldn't keep living like this. The next morning, I called a lawyer. It felt like a decision I should have made weeks ago, but I had been holding on to hope, trying to salvage something that wasn't there anymore. But there was no more hope left. The trust, the respect, I couldn't see a way back. And so, I made the hardest phone call of my life, asking about the process for filing for divorce. Ally didn't know yet. I hadn't told her. But it was only a matter of time before she found out. I wasn't ready to have that conversation. I didn't know how to tell her that everything we had built together was over. That we were over. But I also didn't know how to continue pretending. I could feel the guilt starting to eat at me. I felt terrible about what I was about to do to our kids. I didn't want them to grow up in a broken home, but I also didn't want them to grow up thinking this was what love looked like: betrayal and deceit. I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing. It didn't feel right. But I knew I couldn't stay in a relationship where the foundation had been shattered, where trust had been replaced with doubt and suspicion. I had to do something to move forward, even if it meant facing the hardest chapter of my life. That night, Ally went to bed early. She was still trying to act like everything was fine, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Maybe she thought if she played the part of the remorseful wife long enough, I would forgive her. Maybe she thought time could heal everything. But time wouldn't fix this. Time wouldn't give me back the trust one had lost. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized that no matter how much I loved her, no matter how much I wanted things to work out, there was no going back. And I wasn't sure if I could forgive her. I had already made my decision, but now, I had to find the strength to act on it. The moment finally came. A week after I made that call to the lawyer, I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Ally and I had barely spoken in those days. She had apologized more times than I could count, but every apology felt like a band-aid on a wound that wouldn't heal. She tried to get us to talk things through, but all I could think about was the betrayal. She kept asking me what we could do to make it right, but I was done talking. There was no fixing this. I had already set the wheels in motion. That morning, as she was getting the kids ready for school, I sat at the kitchen table, hands shaking, trying to gather the words that would end everything. I thought I could be strong, that I could say it without breaking down. But when she walked in, smiling, asking if I was ready to go to work, it all became so much harder. Ally, I said, my voice unsteady. We need to talk. She paused, and for a second, I saw the flicker of hope in her eyes. She probably thought I was finally ready to forgive her, that we could put all this behind us. But I wasn't. I wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet, maybe not ever. I've been to see a lawyer, I said, the words spilling out of me before I could stop them. She froze. The smile fell from her face. What? What do you mean? Her voice was suddenly tight, almost pleading. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I'm filing for divorce, Ally. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep living like this. Her eyes widened, and for the first time since this all started, I saw true panic. She took a step back, like I had physically hit her. You're serious, she whispered, almost too quietly for me to hear. I can't trust you anymore, I said, the words feeling like daggers in my throat. I can't live in a house where I feel like a stranger to the person I thought I knew better than anyone. You've broken something inside me, and I don't know if I can fix it. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. She was shaking now, tears starting to fill her eyes. She reached out to me, like she was trying to grab hold of something, anything, to make this stop. Tim, please. I can fix this. I can. Just give me a chance. I know I messed up, but I love you. I do. Please don't leave. Her voice cracked, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. It almost made me want to cave. I loved her, I did. But this wasn't about love anymore. It was about respect, trust, things that had been torn apart the second she let Mark into our lives. Ally, I said, my voice low, barely a whisper. I've already made up my mind. I'm not changing it. I saw her try to hold back a sob, but it was no use. She collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands, her body shaking with sobs. It broke me to watch her like that. I wanted to comfort her, to hold her, tell her that everything would be okay. But I couldn't. I couldn't keep pretending. I'm sorry, I said, though it felt meaningless coming from me. I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. I walked away then, feeling the weight of the words I had just said. Every step I took away from her felt like a betrayal of its own, but it was the only thing I could do. It wasn't easy. I had to fight the urge to turn around, to apologize, to tell her that we could work it out somehow. But I knew I couldn't. I had made my decision. There was no going back now. As I left the house, I closed the door behind me. I didn't look back. But I heard her voice, soft, broken, pleading, as the door clicked shut. It was the last thing I heard before I stepped into the car, and it echoed in my head the whole way to the lawyer's office. I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing. Hell, I wasn't even sure if I was ready for what was about to come next. But I knew I couldn't stay. Not in a marriage that felt like a lie. And so, I kept moving forward, not looking back. The days after I made the decision felt like a fog, like I was walking through life on autopilot. I moved through the motions, work, the kids, dinner, like everything was fine, but nothing felt normal. The silence between Ally and me was deafening. It wasn't just the lack of conversation, it was the way she avoided me, how she tried to act like I hadn't just shattered everything. It was like we were living in parallel worlds, two people existing in the same space but not really seeing each other. She still tried to engage, to make me see that she was sorry, but the more she tried, the more I felt this deep hollow ache in my chest. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. I couldn't even remember the last time I really saw her, the woman I thought I knew. Now, all I could see was someone who had broken our vows, who had turned our life together into something unrecognizable. One evening, she tried again. We were both in the living room, the kids tucked away in their rooms, and she sat down next to me on the couch. "Tim," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been thinking. Maybe we can go to therapy. Maybe if we really work on it, we can get past this." I stared at her, the words hanging in the air. I wanted to tell her that it was too late for therapy, that the damage was done, that I couldn't just erase what she had done. But instead, I just nodded, because I didn't know what else to do. I wasn't sure if therapy would help, if there was anything that could help anymore. "Do you still love me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It felt like an impossible question. Of course, I still loved her. But that love was different now, tainted by everything that had happened. How could I look at her and feel the same way after everything had unraveled? How could I go back to the person I was before, when it felt like everything we'd built was a lie? "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't know if I can love you the way I did. Not after what you did. I can't just forget it, Ally." She looked crushed, and I saw the tears welling up in her eyes again. But this time, I didn't feel that familiar urge to comfort her. I didn't feel like I could fix this for her anymore. She had broken something in me, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be fixed. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice breaking. "You have to believe that. I swear, it was just a mistake." I almost laughed at that. A mistake. That's how she saw it. As if her choices didn't matter, as if I should just sweep it under the rug and pretend nothing happened. But the truth was, I couldn't forget. I couldn't ignore the way she had crossed a line, the way she had betrayed me. And yet, a part of me still wanted to forgive her. I wanted to believe her when she said it was a mistake, that we could somehow find our way back to each other. But deep down, I knew it was over. The trust was gone, and no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that we could make it work, the reality was that I couldn't look past what had happened. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. I kept wondering if I was doing the right thing. Was I being too harsh? Maybe I should try harder, give her another chance. But when I thought about the future, I couldn't see it with her. I couldn't imagine a life where this betrayal wasn't hanging over us like a dark cloud. I didn't know what was next. I didn't know how to navigate this pain, this sense of loss. But I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep pretending that everything would be okay if I just forgave her. The weight of it all was too much. And so the silence between us grew louder, and with it, the realization that we were done. There was no going back. No fixing this. I just had to figure out how to move on. Tea wasn't long after that conversation that I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a pile of divorce papers. They seemed almost surreal in front of me, words on a page that would end everything. They represented the finality of it all, the choice I'd made after months of doubt and heartache. The kids were out with Ally's mom, so it was just me, the papers, and the reality that I was about to end a chapter of my life that I had never imagined would end this way. I picked up the pen, feeling its weight in my hand, but I couldn't bring myself to sign it. Part of me still wanted to fight, to fix things, even though I knew it was futile. There was nothing left to salvage, and yet here I was, hesitating at the very thing I had decided to do. When Ally walked into the kitchen later that afternoon, she paused when she saw what I was holding. Her eyes immediately dropped to the papers, and I watched her face go pale. She knew what they were without me saying a word. She didn't need to ask. Her breath hitched in her throat, and for the first time in days, I saw the raw pain in her eyes. "Tim," she started, her voice small, hesitant. "Please don't do this." I couldn't look at her. I couldn't look at the person who had betrayed me, the person I once trusted more than anything. My chest tightened as I picked up the pen and signed my name without saying a word. It felt like the most painful thing I'd ever done, and yet, it also felt like the most necessary thing. The moment my signature hit the paper, I felt like a weight had lifted, but in its place was a void, a space where love had once lived, now hollow and empty. Ally stood there, her hands shaking. I know I messed up. But I swear I can't lose you. Not like this. I still couldn't look at her. You already did, I said, the words coming out colder than I intended. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending like everything's okay. I don't trust you anymore. Not after everything. Not after him. The him hung in the air, and she flinched like I'd slapped her. She took a step toward me, but I just shook my head. It's done, Ally. We're done. There's nothing left to fix. Her eyes welled up, and she took a shaky breath, like she was trying to hold herself together. I could see that she was still holding onto the hope that somehow this wasn't real, that somehow I would change my mind. But I had made up my mind. I had to. I couldn't live in a marriage built on lies anymore. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered again, the words like a broken record. I'm so sorry. I love you. I really do. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the words. I didn't want to hear them anymore. Not when they meant nothing. The damage was done. I had already given everything, and she had thrown it all away. I know, I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. But love isn't enough when trust is gone. You destroyed that, Ally. And I can't rebuild it. She stood there, motionless, as the reality of what was happening finally sank in. Her shoulders shook, and for a moment, I thought she might break down right there in front of me. But I didn't move. I couldn't comfort her. I had nothing left to give. When she didn't say anything else, I finally looked up at her, and for the first time in weeks, I saw the person I had once known. The woman I had loved, the woman who had promised me forever. But it was too late. I couldn't unsee the betrayal. I couldn't go back to the person I was before all of this. I'll file the papers, I said, my voice final. It's over. And with that, she left. She didn't say another word. She didn't try to stop me. She just walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the papers and the wreckage of a life I had tried so hard to build. The next few days felt like an out-of-body experience. I moved through the motions, talked to the lawyer, made arrangements for the kids. But in the back of my mind, there was always that nagging sense of loss. It wasn't just Ally I was grieving. I was grieving the life we had, the family we had built, everything I thought we were. But I couldn't go back. I couldn't undo what she had done. And as hard as it was, I knew that walking away was the only way to heal. I had to let go. And it hurt like hell. The first few days after signing the divorce papers felt like I was in some kind of daze, like I was walking through life with a fog around me. I moved through the motions, work, picking up the kids, trying to keep up with daily life, but nothing felt the same. I kept expecting Ally to come around, to try to fix things again, but she never did. The silence between us had stretched into something unbearable. She had moved into the guest room a couple of days after I signed the papers, but even though we weren't sharing a bed anymore, it felt like there was this constant presence in the house. A tension that weighed down everything. The kids didn't know anything yet, they were too young to understand the details, so we just told them we needed some space for a while. I couldn't tell them the truth. Not yet. They didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of all this. And then one night, after the kids were asleep, Ally came to me. She stood in the doorway of the living room hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she should even be there. Tim, she started, her voice low, almost fragile. Can we talk? I wasn't sure what she wanted. I had already made my decision. There was nothing more to say. But still I nodded, because I owed her that much. I owed her at least the decency of hearing her out one last time. She sat down across from me on the couch, wringing her hands in her lap. I've been thinking a lot about everything, about us, about all of it. She swallowed hard, her eyes red from crying. I never meant to hurt you, Tim. I swear. And I'm so sorry for what I did. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know that I am truly sorry. Her words were the same ones she had said 100 times before, but this time, I saw something different in her. Something deeper. Maybe it was the guilt. Maybe it was the realization that everything was really over. But whatever it was, it didn't make it easier. The pain was still there, still raw. I know you've been sorry, I said, my voice softer than I wanted it to be. But I can't keep hearing it. I can't keep listening to these empty apologies. It doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't take away what you did. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes again. I understand. I understand that you can't forgive me. I need you to know that I never wanted to lose you. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Tim. And now I've ruined everything. I felt that familiar tug in my chest. I wanted to reach out to comfort her, to tell her it was going to be okay, but I couldn't. I couldn't lie to her, and I couldn't lie to myself. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said, my voice cracking slightly. What you did, it broke something in me, Ally. I can't just forget it. And I can't keep pretending like everything is fine when it's not. She didn't say anything for a long time, just sat there, looking down at her hands. Finally, she whispered, I know. And I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know how sorry I am. How much I regret everything. It was quiet between us for a long time after that, the weight of the situation hanging heavily in the air. I wanted to say something else, to offer some kind of closure, but I didn't know how. What more could I say? What more was there to say? Finally, Ally stood up, wiping her eyes. I guess I should go. I know you're right. There's no fixing this. She turned to leave, and for a moment, I thought I might say something to stop her. I almost did. But I knew I couldn't. There was no going back now. Goodbye, Tim, she said quietly, her voice breaking as she stepped out of the room. And just like that, the door closed between us, and I was left alone again. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself feel the full weight of everything. The heartbreak, the loss, the anger. It all hit me in a wave, and I let myself feel it, even though it hurt. I had to let it out, had to face it. Because that was the only way I was going to heal. It wasn't easy. It wasn't something I wanted to deal with. But I knew it was the only way forward. I couldn't keep holding on to the past, to the person Ally used to be, to the life we used to have. It was gone. And I had to let it go. As much as it hurt, I knew that leaving her was the right thing to do. It wasn't the life I wanted, but it was the life I had to build now. The only life that was left. And so, I started to let go. The days after that conversation with Ally felt like I was walking through a fog, but something in me started to shift. I had to start moving forward, even if it was just a little bit at a time. I wasn't ready to forgive Ally, and maybe I never would be, but I had to begin picking up the pieces of my life. The kids still didn't know much, they were young, and I wanted to protect them from all the chaos swirling around us. I threw myself into work, into being the best dad I could be, even though the weight of everything hung over me. Every time I looked at Ally, I felt this ache, but there was no going back. We weren't the same people anymore. One evening, I sat down with the kids and told them things were changing, that we were still a family, but we wouldn't all be living under the same roof anymore. They didn't fully understand, and I didn't want to burden them with the details. But I saw the fear in their eyes, and it made me realize how much I needed to keep it together for them, no matter how broken I felt inside. The first step was just getting through each day, one foot in front of the other. I wasn't healed, not by a long shot, but I knew I had to keep moving for me and for them. And maybe, just maybe, I'd find a way to heal. But for now, I had to start somewhere. Tea wasn't easy, but eventually, the chaos started to quiet down. The days were still tough, and the weight of the divorce was always there, but I started to notice small moments of peace creeping in. I was getting better at being present for the kids. We went on little outings, just the three of us, and while there were moments where I caught myself wishing things were different, there was also a sense of relief in the quiet. The tension was gone. The anger, the constant questioning, was starting to fade. I even found myself laughing again, something I hadn't done in a while. There were moments, small ones, where I could almost forget the pain and just be in the moment with my kids. That felt like progress, even if it was slow. Ally and I had minimal contact, just about the kids and logistics. It wasn't friendly, but it wasn't hostile either. I could feel that she was still hurting, but I couldn't fix that anymore. She had her own path to walk now, and I had mine. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Not that everything was perfect, but that maybe, eventually, I'd find a way to move on completely. That I'd find a way to heal and be whole again. It wasn't the life I thought I'd have, but it was mine now. And that was enough. Time passed, and with it, things started to feel less raw. I still had moments when I'd remember everything that had happened, those late nights, the questions, the hurt. But those moments became less frequent. Life was starting to take on a new rhythm. It wasn't the life I had envisioned with Ally, but I was carving out something that worked for me. I started focusing more on myself, something I hadn't done in years. I got back to the things I loved: reading, working out, even picking up an old hobby I'd neglected. It felt strange at first, like I was rediscovering parts of myself I had lost. But there was something freeing about it, too. I wasn't defined by what happened. I was more than the betrayal, more than the man who had been hurt. The kids were adjusting well. They had questions, of course, and I did my best to answer them honestly without oversharing. They still had both of us, and I promised myself I'd be the best dad I could be. Ally and I, though, we were moving in different directions. There were days when I still felt a pang of guilt for ending things, but then I'd remind myself of why I had to do it. And slowly, I began to believe it was for the best. I was taking control of my life again, building a future that was no longer defined by the past. It wasn't easy, but I was learning how to breathe again. How to live again. And that, in itself, felt like a victory. As the months went by, the ache of what happened started to fade, though it would always be there, lurking in the background. It was like a scar. It would never completely disappear, but it wasn't as painful anymore. I learned to live with it, to accept it as part of my story. I found new purpose in my life. I spent more time focusing on my kids, on building a stable, happy environment for them. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I got involved in their activities, helped with school projects, and made sure we had fun together. I tried to create memories that they would hold on to, ones that didn't involve the mess I'd been through. I also started dating again, though I was cautious. The thought of trusting someone else seemed impossible at first, but over time, I met people who reminded me that not everyone would hurt me. That love, even after betrayal, was still something worth pursuing. I wasn't rushing it. I wasn't ready for anything serious yet, but it felt good to feel something again, even if it was just the beginning of healing. Ally and I rarely spoke, only when necessary for the kids. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering how she was doing, but it didn't control me anymore. She had made her choices, and I had to live with mine. We both had our own lives now, separate but tied together by our children. I no longer felt the need to fix her, or fix us. That part of my life was over. I had finally started walking down a new path, one that was mine to define. And for the first time in a long time, I felt okay with that. It wasn't until one evening, sitting on the couch after putting the kids to bed, that I truly realized how far I'd come. The house was quiet, and the weight of everything felt lighter. The anger, the sadness, it wasn't gone, but it wasn't consuming me either. I had let go of the need for answers, the endless questions that had tormented me for so long. I had stopped wondering why Ally did what she did, and instead focused on rebuilding my own life. I had accepted that some things would always be out of my control, and that I couldn't spend forever trying to fix what was broken. Sometimes, things just fall apart, and the best you can do is pick up the pieces and move forward. I'd gotten to a place where I could look at Ally without feeling anger bubbling up. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. It was more like a quiet understanding that we had both made mistakes, that we had both done things we couldn't take back. But I didn't need her to make it right anymore. I was doing that for myself. I thought about how my life used to revolve around Ally and what we were building together. Now it was about me and my kids. It wasn't the life I had imagined, but it was the life I had, and I was making the best of it. The scars from the betrayal would always be there, but they didn't define me. They didn't define my future. I was learning to trust again, not just others, but myself. And that was the first step to healing. Looking back on everything, it's hard to believe how much I've changed. The pain, the heartache, it feels distant now, like a chapter in a book I've closed for good. But it's still part of me, and it always will be. The road to this place wasn't easy. There were days I didn't know if I'd make it through, days when I doubted myself, days when I wanted to scream at the world for how unfair it all felt. But here I am. Stronger. Not because the hurt magically disappeared, but because I learned to live with it, to move forward despite it. I've come to realize that life doesn't always go according to plan. It doesn't always give you the happily ever after you imagine, no matter how hard you fight for it. Sometimes, things fall apart. People make mistakes. And sometimes, you end up with a broken heart. But that doesn't mean your story is over. I've learned that the things you think are the end of the world, the things that tear you apart, are often just the beginning of something new. It might not look like what you thought it would, but it's still your story to tell. And the pain? It eventually becomes something you carry with you, not as a weight, but as a lesson. I'm not who I was before Ally's betrayal. I'm not the same person I was when I was living in that house, desperately trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. I'm someone new now. Someone who knows that strength comes not from holding on, but from letting go. The kids are doing well. They're still adjusting, of course. Divorce is never easy on children, no matter how young they are, but they're resilient. I'm proud of them for how they've handled it. We've created a new rhythm, a new normal, just the three of us. And in some ways, it feels better than the old normal ever did. There's a sense of peace now, a sense of control over our lives that I didn't have before. I'm more present for them now than I ever was when I was trying to keep a broken relationship intact. I'm showing them that even when things fall apart, you keep going. You adapt. You build something new. As for Ally, well, I don't know what her life looks like now. And frankly, I don't care. It's not about her anymore. I used to spend so much time thinking about her mistakes, about her reasons, about why she did what she did. But it doesn't matter anymore. She has her own path now, and I have mine. That's the way it's supposed to be. I don't wish her ill, but I've learned that I can't carry her weight anymore. I have to carry my own. I've started dating again, though I'm taking it slow. I'm not rushing into anything. I've been hurt, and I'm not ready to let someone in completely just yet. But it feels nice to be open to the idea. I'm learning to trust again, not just other people, but myself. I've realized that being vulnerable doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're strong enough to risk being hurt for the possibility of something real. I'm not looking for the perfect person. I'm just looking for someone who's willing to be real with me, someone who understands that we all have scars. It's not about perfection, it's about being honest, about showing up, about building something with trust and respect, not fear. I still have days when the past tries to sneak up on me. There are moments when I think about Ally and everything that happened, and I feel a pang of grief. It's natural. I'm human. But those moments don't control me anymore. They don't define me. They don't stop me from moving forward. They're just part of the landscape of my life, and I can't let them stop me from walking towards something better. I think the hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself, it was accepting that it wasn't my fault. That I didn't do anything wrong. I used to blame myself for what happened, wondering if I missed signs, wondering what I could have done differently. But I've learned that sometimes, people make choices that have nothing to do with us. Ally's actions weren't my fault. Her betrayal wasn't because I wasn't good enough or because I didn't try hard enough. She made those choices. She is responsible for them, just like I'm responsible for my own. And that's been the hardest lesson of all, learning to let go of the guilt. Learning to forgive myself for things that weren't mine to fix. Because I did everything I could. I loved with everything I had, and sometimes, that's all you can do. So now, I focus on the present. On the life I'm building for myself and my kids. On being the best version of myself, even on the days when it feels hard. I focus on the lessons I've learned and the strength I've gained from this experience. I'm not perfect. I'm still figuring things out. But I know now that no matter what happens, I'll be okay. Because I've been through the worst, and I came out stronger on the other side. This is the story of my life now. It's mine to tell. It's not about what was taken from me, but about what I've reclaimed. What I've built. And no matter how painful the road has been, I'm finally at a place where I can say, without a doubt, that I'm ready for whatever comes next.